Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Creepypasta stories are great, but does anyone have any good true creepy stories? Episode 11. I was a graphic designer at an agency shortly after I left college. Every day was incredibly stressful. They never knew how to say no to the client and always overpromised and underdelivered. Every project was an emergency. Finally, my then girlfriend, now wife, suggested that I try meditation. I am in no way a religious guy, but I can admit strange and unexplained things happen outside the realm of what we understand is normal. So, I did some minor research and started off with Kundalini meditation and borrowed an album from a coworker to guide me through it. The first time I did it, I was just a little dizzy. There are a lot of breathing methods implemented in most meditations, but Kundalini asks you to do several different types. The next time it was around 3 a.m. This was also to help me sleep. My girlfriend was asleep, and I was sitting on the floor in the bedroom by the bed. I could hear my breathing and my GF's breathing and, distinctly, the breathing of someone else. My eyes snapped open, and I turned around expecting Tina to be standing there. Nothing. I turned back around and was facing the doorway that leads out into a short hallway. That was where I first saw it. It was like human but standing awkwardly, like this is not how it normally stands. It looked like it was struggling to stay on 2 feet. I could not make out details. It was entirely black, not to be confused with an absence of light, but black as a color, and it was standing in a dark hallway. We have a wireless switch for our fan/light. I hit the light. Nothing was there. The next day I tossed it off to it being late and a weird breathing exercise. It was just my brain playing games on my overactive and tired mind. I went to work and came home. Tina called and said that she was running late and that she would be home in a few hours. I said I would have dinner ready. The water was boiling with the pasta and the meat sauce was on a low simmer and it had gotten dark. I had been playing a game when the timer went off and suddenly realized just how dark it had gotten. I went into the kitchen to strain the pasta. This part happens in the blink of an eye. I had that feeling that someone was there, like having your eyes closed and someone holding their hand in front of your face. I freaked out and thought it was an intruder and turned quickly with a knife from the counter. With all the survival skills I have, I still dropped the knife when I saw it. It was only there until it was in my direct field of vision. It was, again, in perfect lighting, still a black spot, not really reflecting any light, still no details inside the silhouette. I stood for what felt like forever staring in the space that it had been, possibly still was, and darting my eyes around to the other dark places to make sure I was alone. I did not want to tell Tina about it. A few years before, she had nightly night terrors and would wake up screaming this horrifying scream. Weeks passed and my hesitation to walk into a dark room passed with them. Eventually I decided to leave my job, and because of the backwards work ethics, they were not going to pay for the 2 weeks of off time I had not used. I took the 2 weeks as vacation and decided to give my 2 weeks notice when I got back. It was going to be a stay cat iron, sleep as long as I can, play games the rest of the day. I would cook dinner and be all around relaxed when Tina got home. About a week in, I woke up briefly as Tina was getting ready for work and fell back asleep. What I thought was minutes later, something felt off and I opened my eyes. Out of the darkness of the hallway came a figure, like a rigid corpse being thrown at me, flying over me and landing on me. I sat up with a short scream. I was 28 years old at the time of writing this, and had been a working freelancer from home since I left the job in 2009. I have seen what I like to call the stranger thing about 10 times. The sightings have not always been at night or inside the house. I have not seen them since earlier, 2010, but I have also not practiced any mediation since those first few times. I have done several pieces of artwork based on these feelings, and one is of the morning vision I described above.
This happened in an apartment I lived in the Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois. I moved into this apartment, a typical Chicago 4+1, in September 2003, and my husband, then boyfriend, moved in October 2003. We had 2 cats, a light orange tabby and a mostly white calico, still have them, too. I had a few experiences at this apartment, but what I'm sharing here is the first experience, and most terrifying. I have had other paranormal experiences since moving out of this apartment, but none of them can hold a candle to this one. It took me 8 years to come to terms with this experience. I am a very logical person, and for the longest time, I was at a loss to explain this. But there's one thing I know for sure: it absolutely happened. In late summer/early fall 2004, I went to bed one night, but as usual could not fall asleep quickly. Our cats normally went to bed with me, but they didn't on this night, so I sat up in bed, hoping I would see them and could call them to me. It was dark, but not pitch dark, because the apartment's windows let in faint light. When I sat up, I focused my eyes on the hallway to see if I could spot the cats playing/running around. But as soon as I focused my eyes on the hallway, I realized there was a very dark black, the blackest black you can think of, blacker than black, even, like velveteen tar, mass just past where the very brief hallway ended and the dining area started. It was around 7 feet high and had a rough head and shoulder/torso shape, but the rest of it kind of faded off. I wasn't alarmed at first. If anything, I leaned forward to try to get a better look, because I absolutely couldn't believe my eyes. I was baffled. But when I leaned forward, the thing seemed to turn and look at me, and when it did, I saw 2 red eyes in the head. I did not see any other features, and I don't remember if the eyes were glowing or just plain red, but they were indeed red. And this is the biggest reason it took me so long to come to terms with this experience. Red eyes are supposed to be of horror movies and scary stories, not reality. When the thing looked at me, my amazement/confusion was quickly replaced by fear. And then it swooped through the bedroom doorway and towards me. I did the only thing I could think of, and that was duck under the covers like a kid hiding from the boogeymen. I was scared. I have been in some scary situations in my life, but that fear was primal and almost unearthly. After several moments, I began to run out of air beneath the covers, so I decided to elbow my sleeping husband in the ribs hard enough to irritate him and make him wake up/sit up/roll over/do something. It worked, and when he didn't react strangely, I figured the thing was gone, and it was. I couldn't get up to use the restroom in the middle of the night for weeks after this. I also made it a point to not look at the doorway if I did happen to wake up in the night. I, and later my husband, saw the shadow again, but it never appeared remotely as threatening.
About a year ago, I moved into an apartment in a new complex. So, can't be haunted because it's not super old, right? First few weeks I stayed there didn't have any issues, but about a month after living there I started waking up in the middle of the night, usually around 1 or 2, to a man standing in my hallway. He wore a white t-shirt and jeans and looked like he was probably in his 30s. When I saw him standing in the hallway, I would bolt out of the bed yelling, and, "What the F are you doing here?" or, "Who the F is you?" But by the time I reached the hallway there would be nobody there. So, because I was a bit stressed at the time, I didn't think anything of it. Having grown up in a haunted house, for real, we'll share those stories another day, I was accustomed to weird things happening, but I hadn't ever seen a full-figured apparition with a face and clothes in such detail, so I figured it probably wasn't an apparition. I figured I was dreaming, and it was just one of those stress-induced dreams where I didn't realize I was dreaming. This probably happened 3 or 4 times over a 2-week period. In general, though, even when I didn't see a man standing in the hallway, I would still wake up almost every around the same time. At the end of this 2-week period, I was tired. Then after the 2-week period, it stopped. I stopped waking in the middle of the night and didn't see any random dudes in my hallway. I went to my friend's house for Sunday dinner at this point, tired, but other than that all was normal. I'm close to my friend's family and her parents are basically my parents, and I go to her parents for advice when I need it. Normally I'm the one to pull one of them aside when I'm struggling, but this time her dad pulled me aside and asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, been stressed, but other than that life is good." He had an intense look of concern on his face, so I was a little taken aback by the intensity of the "Are you okay?" questions. So, I asked, why? This part is a bit religious, sorry for the non-religious ones out there, only a small part of the story though. My friend's dad is a spiritual/religious man. When I asked why, he said that the other night he had the strongest feeling he needed to pray for me and pray that my home be cleansed and that evil presence in my home would leave. So, about the time he prayed that an evil presence leaves my home, I started sleeping through the night. Which brings me to the next part of the story. In the apartment above me, there lived a crazy person. Well, maybe she wasn't crazy, but it kind of seemed like she was. She was an older woman, maybe in her 60s. I would hear her pacing the floor and talking all night long. Not every night, but a lot. At first, I thought she was watching TV, but then I realized it was a single voice, never background music, and when she would talk in the bathroom, I could hear her conversations. Got to love thin walls in apartment living. I should mention she lived alone, and when she would have these conversations there was never any other voice I would hear. Just hers. So, I assumed she just talked to herself all night long. Fast forward 6 months when the lady upstairs moved out. Her family came and moved her out suddenly. Finally, I would be able to sleep without hearing her talk to herself all night. By this time, I had a roommate, and my roommate had a dog. A few days after the lady upstairs moved out, the dog stopped going into my roommate's room and would freak out in the hallway if you left her there at night. I now slept with my door closed, because I had a roommate and her dog, so I didn't witness the freakouts at first. Normally during the day, the dog would sit in the window of my roommate's room and watch the people go by, basically all day long. Now suddenly the dog wouldn't go into my roommate's room, and when she was in the hallway she would cry and scratch at my door to be let in. At night she would normally sleep in my roommate's room, but suddenly she wouldn't, and if you forced her you would have to literally drag her in, and then she would scratch and cry to get out. I started to feel like I was being watched when I showered. Or I would feel like someone else was in the room when nobody was there. That's when I noticed the man in the hallway was back. I never told my roommate about previous experiences with the man in the hallway until she brought up that she just started feeling weird at night and would wake up night after night. If you don't want roommates to pick up and leave you, don't tell them ghost stories that happened in your house. So that's when I told her about the man in the hallway, and that's when we called my friend's dad. My friend's dad came over and blessed the house, and we didn't have any issues after that. The dog went back to hanging out by the window all day, after a couple of days of the guy in the hallway not showing up, and my roommate started sleeping through the night again. My theory is the man in the hallway left my place and went upstairs, and that is who the lady upstairs would talk to all night long. And why her family freaked out and moved her suddenly. Once she left, he came back down to my place. Till he got booted. Question is, where did he go? Me and my brother were downstairs once watching TV in the house alone, when we heard this massive thwomp come from the room right above us, like a grown-ass man climbed up on a dresser and jumped off onto the floor or something. Or when we'd be in my room upstairs playing video games and it would sound like the clothes hangers in the closet in the adjacent room were moving, as if someone was picking out something to wear. We'd even try to outsmart it, one of us staying in one room and the other, usually me, going to check it out. It always stopped right as we rounded the corner though. I went to sleep many nights listening to someone or something looking through that closet on the other side of the wall. Other two, things would move from where you put them. Car keys would always wind up in a certain spot on the kitchen counter, after disappearing from around the house. One bathroom always seemed like someone was standing in the doorway when you passed it in the hall. You didn't see anything, you just always startle thinking someone was right there. My brother/dad told me years later they had the same sensation. You just never felt alone there. Also, I remember when Hurricane Hugo came through, all my family were at the house and I got put in bed in Aunt Sarah's old room, an elderly aunt that had moved out into a nursing home. the one where the closet made the noise. I spent that entire night thinking all about the hurricane because I was sitting up, staring at this creepy old wooden rocking chair that was in the corner. It didn't move or anything, I just felt someone there. I told my uncle about that recently. He grew up in the house too, and that chair always freaked him out too, and that Aunt Sarah refused to let him or anyone ever sit in it when he was a kid, and never sat in it herself, because in her words, it's an antique, you never know who it might have belonged to. I know all this doesn't fit the spooky story with a punchline theme going on here, but I thought I'd share. A year ago, my friend and I were living in the house his parents had been renting out. The previous people living there had just moved out earlier that week and the house had zero furniture and stuff other than a fridge. We had moved a TV into the living room and were both sleeping in that room, and the only other room with anything in it was the master bathroom, which had all our toothbrushes, soap, etc. in it. I'm always up late and I would always think I heard stuff, but usually just thought I was hearing things. But one night we were both awake and heard a loud bang from the bathroom in the master bedroom. We both looked at each other and went to look at what had made the noise. The door to the bathroom was open, which wasn't a big deal because one of us probably had left it open, but all our toiletries were all over the place on the floor, and the door to the walk-in closet was open and neither of us had been in there at all. None of the other doors in the house were opened and nothing bigger than that happened since, but I still wonder what happened that night. I was 17 years old and lived in a very small rural community in Central California. It was late spring 1996. My best friend and I were bored, and decided to take a drive, something we did frequently. Bear in mind, that where I lived was basically surrounded on one side by mountains, and the other by over 80 miles of flat, sandy valley. Anyway, it was about 11 p.m., and we had been driving out toward the valley on a dirt road for about an hour. Descending into the valley from the hills, I spot a glimmer of reddish-orange light. We of course drive another 20 minutes toward the glimmer and come upon it. Coals. The glimmer was embers, or coals of a fire. Where we were, there was nothing, and I mean nothing. No bushes, no trees, no hills, nothing. Not for at least 10 miles in either direction. Flat. We shined a handheld spotlight all around, and didn't see anybody or anything. We decided the proper thing to do was to turn the truck around and throw dirt on the embers by spinning the truck tires. As my friend backed up the truck, I looked out my rolled-down window, and not 5 feet from me was the largest man I've ever seen. Black, shirtless, bald, wearing only denim shorts. At least 6 feet 5 inches, 300 pounds, and staring right at me. I yelled "Drive," and without even looking, my friend tears off out of there. When I catch my breath, I explain what I saw. He's still driving 50 to 60 miles per hour on a dirt road back toward town, which at that speed, we could reach town in around 30 minutes. Of course, my friend never saw anybody, and he and I both think I'm losing my mind. Remember, there was nothing out there besides the coals. No car, no motorcycle, nothing. No way for anyone to be out there other than by foot. I should also mention that heading back to town, there were any number of dirt roads back in, and I'm talking hundreds. Trails, road, hills, hell, we were in a 4x4 and could have made our own road if we wanted to. We ended up coming down a rarely used dirt road, and on the last curve before pavement, just outside town, the same man steps out from behind a tree, looks at us, and shakes his finger and head at us as if he were scolding a child. We both saw him this time, and when we looked back, he was gone. This is the only story in my life I have no explanation for. First, there is no possible way this person could have known which way we'd go back into town, especially with enough time to hide, and wait for us. Second, and I know I already said it, but there was no vehicle out in the flats. There just wasn't. To this day, I get the creeps just thinking about it. I work in an old folks' home at night. It's usually pretty calm since most of the residents go to sleep early in the night, and then it's just answering the alarm phones. Every resident has an alarm they can press if they need help with anything. Usually, it's just going to the bathroom, but now and then someone falls over or something. A few weeks ago, when I got to work, they told me one of the ladies there had died during the evening, which happens now and then since the residents are old and sick. She was still in her room since it was getting late, but they locked the door so none of the other residents wandered in there. Her apartment number was 18, which is on the second floor. So later that night, around 3 a.m., my coworker, we're always two people working, was off doing laundry, so I was alone in the staff room watching TV. My alarm phone rings, and I see it's number 18. I do a double take and recheck it, but it's number 18. I just pretended like I didn't see it. No way I'm answering that. I know it was probably a glitch or something, but I did not go near her door until the funeral home retrieved her body. I never told my coworker either. When my oldest daughter was about 2 to 4 years old, she would watch this claymation kids show called JoJo's Circus. JoJo was a young female clown. My daughter had a stuffed doll of JoJo that had a speaker inside, and when you squeezed different parts of her, she would say different things. She would sing songs, repeat shapes, colors, numbers, etc. as a sort of educational toy. If you were playing with her and didn't touch her for a minute or two, she would say, "Let's play." If you did play with her, she would start back up. If you didn't, she would shut off. As my daughter got a little older, she lost interest in JoJo. So, the doll ended up in a plastic tub in the garage. All stuff to give away, sell in a garage sale, whatever. Our master bedroom was right above the garage, and one night my wife woke me up and said that she heard someone talking. It sounded like it was coming from outside. I listened, and sure enough I faintly heard what sounded like a child laughing and talking, but it sounded like it was in the house, downstairs. We listened to it for a minute or two, then I decided to go investigate. I looked out the windows, didn't see anything unusual. I made my way downstairs and heard the voice coming from the garage. As I neared the garage door, I recognized the voice as the JoJo doll. I paused by the door and listened. It sounded like someone was frantically pushing the buttons, not letting her finish an entire song or complete a phrase. It would say, "square" and "3." Like someone was just mashing the buttons. I thought maybe there was some sort of animal attacking the doll, or maybe the batteries were just running low. But for the record, when the batteries would get low in that doll, it would get slow sounding. It wasn't doing that. So, I grabbed a softball bat out of my bat bag that I had in our mud room. I paused for a second, thinking that I was about to get into a fight with a raccoon or something. I pounded on the door a little bit to scare off whatever it was, but the sounds persisted. So, I took a deep breath, opened the door and hit the lights. JoJo was sitting there, sitting up, on top of the plastic bin that she was in. The lid was sealed closed. She completed her phrase and went silent. I stood there for a few minutes, still inside the house, just looking around. It was silent. She wasn't making any more noises. I didn't hear anything moving. Silence. I saw her the moment I opened the door. Nothing was close to her. I walked out into the garage and started poking around, rattling things, trying to make any animals move. Nothing. Then JoJo said, "Play with me." I picked her up. There was no marks, so saliva, no signs that an animal had been tampering with it. I opened the plastic tub that she was in, and everything looked fine. No sign of animals. Weird. I took her out and put her in the trunk of my car so she wouldn't wake us up again. I told my wife it was just JoJo and that her batteries must be running low. I asked her if she or our daughter had gotten her out of the box, and she said no. I spared her the details because she would have never slept in that house again. But it was weird. It really sounded like someone was playing with that doll. And the moment I opened the door, it stopped. Was the doll malfunctioning? Was there an animal of some sort? Was there a ghost kid playing with it? To this day, I have no idea. As a little background, I am certain that no one has ever died in that house. It was built in 1981, and my wife was childhood friends with the girl that lived there when it was first built. She is still alive, and we bought the house from her divorced mother. We were the second owners. I come from a very poor upbringing, and when I was 7 years old my grandmother let my mother, my dad, and myself temporarily stay in one of her one-bedroom duplex apartments that she had bought in the late 70s. We had nowhere else to go at that point and had been living in rundown hotels week by week. My grandmother's duplex was built in the 40s, but that is beside the point. When I was a child, I used to have severe eye crust whenever I would wake up. A lot of times I had to literally wash it off in the bathroom sink before I could see because it was so thick. I remember one morning waking up, it had to be around 9 a.m. and I could see that the front door was open because the sunlight coming through the bedroom doorway which was also open. I could also hear my parents outside laughing and joking with my grandmother who I found out had stopped on her way to work to say hello. That morning, I could feel the eye crust on my eyelids, but it wasn't super bad that I had to go wash it off, so I crawled across both beds and sat on the edge. Since my parents and I shared the one room, our two full-size beds were pushed together to form a giant bed. The room was so small that it literally took up almost the entire room. Besides the combined beds, there was literally just a TV stand and the actual door on the left. While sitting on the edge of the bed, I remember my feet dangling off the edge. I was a very small kid, and I began my normal routine of painstakingly picking off the eye crust. This morning, I was extra eager because I wanted to say hello to my grandma. Well, as soon as I remember clearing my eyes, I was a moment away from jumping off the bed onto the floor. A hand shot up from beneath the bed and grabbed me by my shirt. It literally paralyzed me in fear, but I was quick enough to let out a high-pitched scream and grab the bar on the head rail of the bed while the hand started pulling. I still remember the feeling of how strong the grasp was around my shirt, and I remember seeing the hand. It looked like a grown man's hand, hairy, big, strong-looking, and it started pulling me forward, as if trying to pull me under the bed. At this point I am screaming my head off and I knew my parents and grandmother heard me because I could hear them running inside. This part scares me. The moment, and when I say the moment before they crossed the threshold into the room to get a view of me on the edge of the bed, the hand immediately let go and shot back under the bed. I was hysterical and my father grabbed me off the bed and picked me up asking what had happened. I remember yelling through my sobs, "It's under the bed. It's under the bed." Well, my father pulled the mattress up then and there and showed me that there was nothing under the beds. And literally, there was nothing. Meanwhile, my mother and grandmother were trying to comfort me by telling me I was still asleep and must have had a nightmare. That was the end of that experience, but there is more. And, before I continue, now that I am an adult, nothing like this has ever happened to me. But until this day I can affirm that I was not sleeping. I was fully awake. But anyways, flash forward to when I was around 14 years old. I was driving with my mother down the road of my grandmother's duplex. She was renting them both out at this point, and my mother saw an old friend sitting outside our same old apartment with her baby. My mother ended up stopping to say hello and catch up. Keep in mind this is in Florida, it's the middle of summer and very hot outside. My mother asked her why she wasn't inside, I think more worryingly for the baby. Well, we could tell my mother's friend had a worried expression when we asked her this. I remember her clearly explaining, hesitantly, that she hated being inside the apartment. She said she was going to tell my grandmother that they were moving soon. The reason? She would hear voices in the room where the whole incident with the hand happened with me. She said it would be whispers, like conversations, and she wanted her and the baby as far away as possible. I never told her about my experience. I could tell she was already genuinely scared, and I didn't want to scare her anymore. But yes, that is my creepy experience. I've always wanted to talk to a medium to see if they could tell me what that hand was, or who/what it belonged to. I am a skeptic but would love to hear some kind of explanation. The house I lived in from birth until I was 11 was close to a hospital for mentally ill people. Nothing like an Outlast or House on Haunted Hill, and it's been shut down for a good few years and turned into houses. Anyway, my parents worked there, my mum a psychiatric nurse and my dad worked on the wards where the guys were deviants. Anyway, we lived in a house about 500 yards away. From an early age my parents tell me I'd be heard laughing uncontrollably. This lasted until I was 2 when I'd have full-blown conversations as much as a 2-year-old could. I vividly remember a kid making shapes with his hands in the light which would set me off. I used to draw on the walls of my room, next to my bed. I seemingly was obsessed with drawing police cars and crowds of people chasing a man. At first my drawings were unintelligible, but then as I approached April 5th, they were getting better, and that's what my parents remember me drawing. Always police cars, always chasing a man. I showed no interest in police or playing cops/robbers outside of this. I played with the kid. I believe one of the funniest things that happened was he locked me in a coal shed from the outside. He told me to get inside, so I did, and then he ran away. My mum heard me screaming, asked how I got in there as the only way to lock it was from the outside, and didn't believe me that it was this kid. This is where it gets freaky. As I aged, I grew out of taking notice of this person who seemed to frequent my room. I woke one night, I think I was June 7th, to a loud banging downstairs. My parents' room was across the landing, so I walked across. Looked down the stairs and was frozen in terror. We had a draft excluder that was like a snake. It was hanging on the door handle of the front door, swinging. There was a man slowly walking up the stairs. I screamed and the man went away, and I heard a voice telling me to come here. I passed out and woke up in my bed as if it were a dream. I went downstairs the next day and saw the snake still on the handle. Freaked me out. My parents didn't tell me until I was much older that before we lived there a man had escaped from the hospital, come to this house and stole a kid and took him back and hid him in a shed on the hospital site for 2 days before he was found.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.